Hey, I'm Katy Spaas, and I'm a world-renowned author and speaker on high sensitivity and a retired coach to professional artists and performers. Spotlight Stress is your guide to build confidence, find your superpower, and claim your shine. Our guest today is Huw Collins, and you might have seen him in Pretty Little Liars or Bools. I'm a big fan of Pretty Little Liars, to be honest, because I think the show has everything a show needs: excitement, drama, beautiful people, and so much passion. But that's not where it ends, because Huw is an entrepreneur like no other. With his wife Molly, they own multiple businesses. They own the Wheat Boutique, and I've scrolled through their website. It is amazing. You need to check that out. They have their own candle and fragrance production company. They have coffee shops. They have a production company as well. And on the side, as a side hustle, as he describes it, he's also acting, writing, producing, and composing whenever he has a little bit of free time left. So, welcome, Huw. How are you? Do you still have time to breathe?
Thank you very much. That's a very nice introduction, and it sounds very overwhelming when you put it that way. But everything's good. I'm here in Maine in the USA, and just returned from a lovely trip to Europe. So I felt it was very nice to be in my first home, and now I'm here in my second home, and I'm very happy to be here talking to you all the way in Belgium.
Thank you. It's really nice to meet you and to take a little dive into everything you've been up to, because you've got quite a journey under your belt. So I'm really excited to see, what were the challenges on that road to success and what helped you move through that. So can you remember a specific struggle that you had to encounter as an actor or an entrepreneur in life in order to move forward?
Well, I think the path of the actor and the path of the entrepreneur are both tricky. They both precipitate a strong sense of obviously working for yourself. You have to have a lot of self momentum. You know, you don't make progress unless you are constantly trying to progress. I think I have always been someone who loved the more difficult path in life because I think it leads to a more gratifying existence, despite the fact that oftentimes it can be harder. And, I think both in my experience as an actor and in my experience as an entrepreneur or business person, a lot of those challenges are quite similar. Often, both of them deal very heavily with people, understanding how to talk to people, how to understand people, I think is such a big thing, and understand that whilst you may have conflict or differences of opinion or come at things from a different perspective, oftentimes there are places where you can find commonalities. And I think one of my best skills, I think, in both facets, is to be able to identify where you can find common ground and you can find, I guess, a way to communicate on the same level, even if you don't necessarily speak the same first language or you don't necessarily come at each problem with the same ideals. So I think that, I guess, going to your question, that's not so much of a struggle. I do think that comes quite naturally to me because of my dad. My dad's always been a very people-facing person. He's a doctor, he's a cardiologist, and he's just got such this like warm generosity of spirit and personality. And it sounds like a flex, but it is something I think I have kind of absorbed very much growing up. I think the natural struggles that come with acting and business is it's hard. It's a lot of quiet work. It's a lot of work that no one else sees. And oftentimes when you get to the point where you have success, everyone's like, oh, that looks so easy. And I think that the success is almost the easy bit. You know, it's the hard work you have to do up until that point, that no one gets to see, and sometimes doesn't lead to success. You know, you are taking a massive amount of risk to either become an actor or a business person, you know, an entrepreneur, because you're trying to generate something out of really nothing, and convince people that it's worth their time or their money. And so I think understanding that, you know, having a good sense of humility and a good sense of perspective going into either endeavor, is really important, because, you know, so many people quantify failure and success in a tangible sense, but oftentimes it isn't really tangible. You know, I see my successes also as, you know, being a great husband to my wife, or, you know, being a good son to my parents, or to my parents-in-law, having great friends, being happy. I mean, they're things that I think oftentimes people don't see as success indicators. So, you know, I've always looked at struggles in an interesting way. I kind of like struggle. I think it's important in life. I think it helps define who you are. So I guess again, a very long-winded way. I did warn you I talk a lot. But that would be kind of, you know, I guess the holistic struggles and I guess intricacies of both things.
And I love the way that you said, you know, I've always liked struggle. And in a way, I think I've always looked for the hard way, because my mom used to literally say, like, you know, why do it easy when you can do it the hard way? But that here it's meant like, you know, you're so stupid. Why don't you just take the easy road? You know, why do you have to make things so difficult? And to be very honest, I think that a lot of highly gifted and maybe also highly sensitive people recognize themselves in taking the harder road and not the easiest way, probably because our brain has a different way of looking at a situation, and it might see you know, different opportunities or different challenges, which leads us to a different path than most people, but also very often to different outcomes. And I think that's why it's so interesting that you've already got that perspective. I think a lot of people need to see more the reward in taking the harder way, because, you know, that is where growth lies. And what did you use to make that hard road a little bit easier for yourself so that you could keep on going and work on your success?
I mean, I think I've always been an optimist, like sometimes to my detriment, but not often. I think what I learned early in life, you know, I started out in life playing professional sport. So I left high school at 18, and started playing rugby professionally. And I think as a child or as a young adult, you know, teenager, I thought I would be a professional sportsman. There's no doubt about it. That's what I thought I would do in my life. But the reality is when I started doing it, I didn't enjoy it that much. And I looked at the future, and I looked at the fact that being a professional sportsman usually ends around, you know, 30 to 35 if you're lucky, if you don't get injured beforehand. And then when you're done, you have to go do something else, because typically, you know, certainly for rugby, which what I was playing, you wouldn't have made enough money to retire and just be retired. And I think what I saw was that as long as I put 100% into whatever I was doing, it would always lead on to whatever I needed it to lead on to. And I think that I have been really lucky that that has been the case. I suspect there are times when it doesn't always end up being that way, but it's also partly perspective. You know, a thing that we perceive as bad in the moment can end up being the thing that changes our whole life for the better in ways we never have imagined. I think from my perspective, I have always looked at the fact that there is no right or wrong decision. There are just decisions and what you make of them. And it's something that my mother-in-law, she says that exact phrase, and I don't think I had ever really verbalized it as that, but she did recently. My wife and I were talking about it, and that's something she has told my wife her whole life. You know, there's no right or wrong decision. It's just decisions and what you make of them. And I think I've always really lived by that ideal, that life throws you what you need when you need it. And I think if you can trust that process, all you really need to know is that you have to really just work really hard and do your best. And I think if you do that, you're often rewarded somehow by life giving you what you need. And I think obviously there are times where, you know, we all doubt ourselves, we doubt the path, we doubt whether it's going to work out. I'm lucky that I don't doubt it very much, but of course there are moments, and in those moments you just have to try and have a healthy perspective on it and know that, you know, life moves on in a way that is both really disheartening to people and also, I think, should be really heartening to people. Like, no matter what happens, life moves on. You know, people die, people suffer great loss, people have great success, but life continues to move. Like we were just in, we went to the Louvre in Paris, which is not something we've done. We visit Paris every year, but we got a tour guide and we went and looked around the Louvre, and it was fascinating. And our tour guide, this lovely Irish fellow called Joseph, said, you know, he took us and showed us the Winged Victory of Scaramouche, which is a, you know, very famous sculpture at the Louvre, along with the Venus de Milo, which is like the two most famous sculptures. And what it represents is a woman on the front of a boat, and it represents victory, but they gave the woman wings, and it wasn't to represent angels. This actually predated religion, so it was before religion was, you know, invented, let's call it. But it was to represent the fact that victory is fleeting, and whilst you might have been victorious today, it may fly away tomorrow. And it's to kind of teach you about humility and to remember that however good or bad this moment right now is, tomorrow will still come. There will, you know, whatever it is today, it might be different tomorrow. And I found it so fascinating. And I think it does represent the mindset with which I look at a lot of things, which is, you know, treat victory and loss with the same sense of healthy respect, and know that neither thing lasts forever, and you just got to keep it moving. You just got to keep it moving and do your best. That's it. That's all you can do.
Yeah, that's a really healthy mindset that you've got there. And I don't know if you can relate to this, but to me, it feels like you've had probably a warm surrounding in your childhood, where you grew up with a lot of love and support, and where there was space to make errors. Is that a little bit?
Yeah, I would say that's true. I think, you know, my dad always said, you know, I will always support you so long as you're giving whatever you're doing 100%. And I think that gives you a lot of room to you know, make mistakes and know that it will be okay. I would just say that, you know, what you're saying is correct. You know, I definitely grew up with a lot of love and support, and I was extremely lucky. But, you know, not to kind of get political or too deep on this, but I do think that as a, you know, straight white male who grew up in a nice middle class environment, I do look at the world today and look back at my life and what I've been able to do or try and do, and know that it would be okay. And I do look at how much opportunity I always felt was boundless. I always felt like no matter what happened, I would still have opportunity. And I do think that that is not the same for everyone. And I am extremely fortunate that that mindset was there, because I just knew that that would be the case. And not everyone has that same not everyone does say, well, I'll try that, and if it doesn't work, well, I'll have another chance, and then another chance, and then another chance. I think so much of the world, and especially here in the US, you have these situations where opportunity is, if there's one thing I think I could give everyone, it would be the genuine understanding that you shouldn't look at every last thing as the last chance. There are opportunities as long as you just persist, but it's a mindset. It's embedded in you, and that's because of my upbringing, and not everyone has that same luck and opportunity. So whilst I believe whatever it is I have achieved or can achieve in the future, I'll be really proud of, because I do work really hard, and I feel like in many senses I've earned it. There are other ways I look at it that I'm so fortunate to be in a position where I even think I can take these chances and it will be okay if they fail. Because knowing that gives you such an advantage, knowing that you can fail and that it will be all right, isn't something a lot, I would even say in that many people feel, and it is a really, really fortunate position. So I'm proud of where we are and what we've been able to do, but I'm also really humbly conscious of the fact that it's the result of my father's struggle and hard work to grow up in really poverty. My dad grew up with nothing, and he worked his whole life to get where he is, and that gave me the opportunity to even do anything in my life. I really look at that, and I think about it a lot, because life can be really hard for a lot of people, and I feel lucky I've been in the position I'm in, for sure.
Yeah, and sometimes we want to apologize for getting that starter advantage. But I don't think that that's necessary, because, we all make something out of it in the way that we can, at our own best possibilities. Because, I grew up in a little bit of the same middle class, having a good life, having a lot of opportunities. But to me, I wasn't the optimistic child you were. My parents got divorced when I was 3.5. So I guess a lot of that safety was, torn away. But also, it was a very hard and competitive environment for me to grow up in. I was in this, not also, but it was more the sports world. But in our case, it was horseback riding, the jumping part. Yeah. And so it is a very competitive, hard, and male environment, especially when I was young. But there was no other way than me becoming a show jumper. I was going to do the Olympics. That was the only goal. So I recognize a lot in your story, but there's a big difference, because when I was growing up, there was a lot of pressure and there was no space to make errors. So that really, was a brain fuck for my optimism. It just shut down all the space. So I think it's so beautiful to hear how you've nurtured that from home, and you've turned it into something bigger. I really had to learn how to change that perspective. The way it comes so naturally for you, I think that's amazing. And that's also the reason why a lot of highly sensitive or highly gifted people, very often it's only acknowledged when we're struggling, because that's when we discover that we're highly sensitive or highly gifted. But people like you, who are thriving and who come from a safe environment and who feel nurtured and who feel the freedom to fully be themselves and make mistakes and grow and learn and have fun while doing so, you are at the top of the world. Because there is no one smarter, more creative, and more bold than you. And I think that's cool, because that is how we should all be. Especially, and I'm talking everyone, but especially us highly sensitive, highly gifted people, because of the deeper way of processing information, when we feel like we can't make mistakes or failure is bad, we really bring ourselves down. And that's when you get in your own way.
I will say, kind of going back to your first question, when it comes to acting and my biggest struggle, I think that probably ironically is one of the biggest struggles has been fear of making mistakes as an actor. Actually, it's funny. I think it's because I didn't grow up doing it. I wasn't, I did it at school, but at school everyone does everything. It doesn't, it doesn't have any real significance. But I think sometimes being a bit constrained by a fear of like, relying on your instincts, but your instincts like kind of coming across weirdly or not quite right. I think the idea of things being right in acting is very much the antithesis of, what the zenith of acting is. It's being in the moment truly and expressing yourself. But, sport, the world that I came from, is so quantifiable. It's you kick the ball, it goes through the post, or it doesn't go through the post. There's no like, oh, did it go over the post? Was that quite right? Like, it doesn't matter. It either goes through or it doesn't go through. And I think that my brain was very, attuned to both looking at things with a very tangible A plus B equals C, but additionally, it was very much about turning off emotion. In sport, you can't let the emotion dictate your behavior because it can lead to you, kind of almost shutting down because, if you have a penalty kick, I guess football is the best analogy here because Belgium, I know, have a very good football team right now, but you have a penalty kick to win the World
Cup. Have an amazing football team. What are you talking about?
No, I'm saying you have an amazing team.
Yeah, we do. Finally.
No, it's incredible. But you have to win something. You haven't won anything yet, and I'm like, it's got to.
That's also mindset. That's That's the pressure taking over. Yeah.
Well, exactly right. So it's the pressure, right? So it's Belgium have a great team, but they just fall short. And why is that? Because oftentimes it's the emotion of the moment takes you over, and it means that it diminishes your ability to carry out the task you're trying to carry out. And I think that in acting, it's very different. It's about being as in the moment as you possibly can all the time. And I think that is something that I have really had to work on because I had really trained myself and become very adept at not being emotional, I guess. So, that kind of going back to your original question, which I don't think I really answered necessarily on the money, would be probably the biggest thing is really just trying to be in the moment, not look at things as right or wrong, which is hard. It's hard to go against a habit or an instinct that you've developed over a lot of years. It can be quite difficult.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting example that you're giving, because to be honest, I've worked with actors who've worked for a lot of years in the industry as well, and there's always the auditioning part, which makes them do strange things, that I'm thinking like, what are you talking about? You did this, and that. I mean, you're amazing. You're brilliant. What do you mean? You're all up in your head looking at, the casting director at how is he or she looking, and what is their faces saying, and but the good news is that this is all trainable. Just the way that you've trained your mindset in an amazing way for your business and to grow over there, it's so easy with just a few techniques and strategies to teach yourself little habits, like you say, little exercises that you can do to really fully be in the moment and to very easily connect with the emotions you want to tune into, instead of trying to read the audience and be disconnected. So that is what I love doing. That's the work I love doing, because that's also how my brain works. And that's why I love working with artists, because our brain just functions in a different way than most people because of the deeper processing. And we do tend to make the opinion of others way too important.
For
And
sure.
that's, it's just really hard to not lose yourself in that moment. And if you know how to tackle the brain and how to really own that moment, then it's just a easy, it's training, it's playing top sport. It is, the brain functions like muscles. And that is also, why I would never say, oh, you know what, let's do 4 sessions and you're good to go, because it doesn't work like that. It's like everything you've said, it's doing the hard work behind the scenes. And that's the same way with training your brain, but it's so rewarding. It's so interesting, and it creates so much more possibilities, opportunities, and space to see things that you never even thought possible.
Yeah.
And I do think that you must have an amazing partner in Molly as well, because the way you guys have been on fire like a rocket ship, I think there must be an amazing, I wouldn't even know how to say it in English, but the way you play.
Like the dynamic.
The dynamic. Oh, thank you. There's an easier way of saying it. So yeah, do are you yin and yang, or how does that work?
Yes, I do have an amazing partner in Molly. I mean, she's incredible. You know, you never know, obviously, who you're going to marry. And speaking of, how life kind of works and gives you what you need when you need it. I was incredibly fortunate to meet Molly when I did. I had just moved to LA. I wasn't on the show. I just was had just moved there really. And I think so much of the business side of things that I've learned have really come from Molly, because she's from a very, her mum is in politics, but her dad is in business and is very successful entrepreneur. And for Molly, it's very much like in her blood, like entrepreneurship and business is like second nature to her. And so much of what I've learned about business has been from her, with her. And I think what has really made it easy for us as a dynamic is that I think we've always just really allowed ourselves and encouraged each other to be ourselves. I think that the best situations for any relationship are when you can be authentic and you can know that you can express yourself and you can be honest. And I think it's hard. It's the harder path. I think a lot of people feel like, it's easier to not, truly be yourself, to keep things a little bit secret, but honestly, for us, we work together so much. We travel a lot together. We, have started this business together. We've done every job you can do in this business. And I think it all just begins with a really healthy level of respect for each other. I think we know that if one of us is slightly tired, the other one will pick up the slack and vice versa. And yeah, I mean, there's so many things I could say about it, but I'm incredibly lucky that we have each other, we can rely on each other. And I think, one of the things her dad said to me when I asked him if I could marry Molly was he told this story, which is great, and I'll keep it short, but he said, when you get married, you have to grow like 2 oak trees next to each other. Not like a vine that kind of interweaves over itself so that you can't really see where one begins and the other ends, but you grow strong next to each other and give each other space, and you give each other shade when each other needs it. And that way you can support one another, but also still be strong on your own. And I can't express how important I think that is in a marriage or a relationship. You know, I think we have really been able to do what we've been able to do because we've been able to be ourselves, but also ourselves together. Um, which I think a lot of people lose sense of in a relationship. It's oftentimes, you know, we're like so on top of each other, not literally, that, you know, we can't like figure out, you know, kind of where one of us starts and the other ends. And I think you lose some of yourself in that. And I think it's so important not to lose some of yourself, because you're your best partner when you are authentically yourself. So I think, I mean, there's, you know, I could go on and on and on, but we've been lucky to find each other, I think. I hope she would say the same thing. I'm sure she, she probably would. But we've been really lucky to find each other and be able to grow together and grow the things that we're growing together. I mean, it makes life better. You know, it makes life better to have success, but be able to share it with someone incredible. I mean, it's, you know, it's amazing.
That's really cool. The coolest thing I've ever heard with the two oak trees, but that's how I've been raised as well. You know, you should each, you know, be your own person and be together as your own person. We don't work together. I think my husband wouldn't be very happy working with me because I'm like a pit bull, you know. I love to be, that's why I do what I do. My mom always used to say, you've got to do what you're good at. I'm really good at putting people to work, you know. So my clients, they get homework, they get tasks to do, they have to train, you know.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting that for him that wouldn't work. So I gave him the space to do what brings him joy, you know, and he gave me the space to fully develop when I was finding myself, because we were together when I was struggling, when I was stuck in a burnout, and when I had to really reinvent myself, or when I was, you know, gifted or granted the opportunity to reinvent myself. But that makes you so much stronger and appreciative of each other. Yeah, as a couple, I think that's really really interesting to see how strong you can be together by being also separate.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And I think, you know, that working together, I mean, I don't think you're unique, or, you know, in the sense that it doesn't work for everyone. And I think we do have a very specific dynamic that what we both want and how we both work are so
Yeah.
similar in many ways. And I think, you know, we're lucky in many senses that that's the case. But in other senses, it can make things trickier as well, you know, distinguishing work from, you know, being a partner in a business to being a husband or a wife in a
Yeah.
marriage. You know,
What's the key, according to you? What's the key to keeping a good balance over there for the
I
people who do work together or are watching?
I'll tell you when I find it. No, I mean, I'm being facetious, but um, I think it's a hard balance. I do. I mean, I think it's a hard balance. It, like any marriage, let alone one that you work together in, it is constant work. You know, you cannot take for granted. Um, I think how fragile relationships can be. I think it's just constant work. I think it's constantly communicating. I think that's probably the biggest thing is communication.
Yeah.
And I think that making sure you don't get complacent and make sure you don't, you know, allow the burdens and the stresses of work to bleed in too much to everyday life. You know, you do have to have that separation of enjoyment and work. We happen to enjoy our work very much, but you still have to make time for, I guess, what people would call traditionally fun, you know, doing things just for the sake of it, not because
Yeah.
it, you know, benefits work. And you know, being really candid, I think we're really good at it sometimes, but we're not really good at it other times. You know, there are times where we have to have hard conversations and be like, you know, we're really not getting this balance right. We need to adjust some of the things that we're doing. And I think the key to that is being I guess, going into that conversation with as little ego as you can and with as much respect for the other person, to understand that if one of you is saying it, it probably has real, relevance, and that you need to listen to each other. If one of you saying, hey, there was a time recently, 5-6 days in a row, I was probably on my computer till 1 a.m., because once the day ends with doing stuff for Wheat, I might need to finish writing a script, or I might need to finish developing a pitch that we're doing next week. And, it can be really hard to balance those things up, but you can't forget that, you also have a wife who, you want to have dinner with and enjoy time with. So it can be tricky. But I think we navigate it really well because we talk to each other really honestly and we respect each other. And I think if you can do that, you can pretty much figure out any issue, I think.
I think you probably nailed it with saying putting the ego aside, because very often we'll probably take things personal or feel attacked, while actually, like you say, the other person is just sharing something that is of relevance to them. And there's just a better way of dealing with that. I am so grateful for talking to you today, Huw. I think that you've been of a tremendous amount of value. You've shared so many beautiful golden nuggets with us today. So yeah, thank you for making the time to be here with us. And is there any last thing you would like to share with the person who's watching this?
Wow, what a question. Well, thank you, number one, for having me. It's been very nice talking to you too, and really interesting questions and a really interesting conversation. I mean, I don't know that I've covered a lot, as I told you.
You did.
But no, I just think I said the same thing I saw my half brother Jack this weekend in London, and he's just doing his GCSE exams in England, so his kind of end of high school exams. And I was telling him that he's a very good go-karting driver. He's in like racing nationally, so he wants to be a Formula One driver, and I love Formula One, so I'm very like go for it.
Yeah.
But as someone who played sport and thought I would end up being a professional sportsman and didn't end up being professional, well, I was, but not for a long time. I just said to him the same thing I said to you, which is no matter what you do, if you do your best, somehow life always rewards you. And I know everyone has off days, and there's some days you don't feel it, and that's okay. But I do think that whatever you're doing, taking chances, doing your best, success is misdefined by so many people. And I think that the success is sometimes in trying your best and it not working out and you picking yourself back up and trying again. And I think if more people could really approach life, whether it's entrepreneurship or acting or sport or anything, with that mindset, I think people will be happier. And I think ultimately that's something to strive for in itself. How can we be happier? How can we be more, satisfied? And we're so lucky to be on this planet and be healthy, speaking for myself, and be, have these opportunities to do what we do. I think, we might only get one chance at doing this. And so why not make the most of it?
Yeah. That's a brilliant way to end the show.
Sorry for rambling on, but it's been so nice to talk to you. Thank you for having me, and I hope that we'll get to do it again sometime.
Yes, let's stay in touch and talk soon. Thank you, Huw.
Thank you, Kathy. Bye, love.